Okay, so today we have Shubha joining us from WVU. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
So to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be interested in this field, and your current field of study?
Yes. So my name is Shubha Narasimhan, and I am completing my master's in social work at West Virginia University. And I feel like I've kind of always been interested in behavioral health because I think with my Indian roots, honestly, there's like a lot of connection. I think we see that now with the popularization of yoga and wellness and like the terms of self-care and things like that. But I feel like with my roots, from India, I feel like that connection has like really helped me understand how connected, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all of those things are. So I think I always kind of was interested because just with my family cultivating that. Um, but also I struggle with depression, anxiety, so I feel like it's really important for me to be able to advocate for, other people who have mental health challenges, and in understanding that, we can still be productive members of society, but also like we can still have a life and really enjoy it to the fullest.
Sure. So I'm interested to know, with your background, and what you plan to do in the future, how did you come to choose social work as the master's level program that you wanted to pursue?
Okay, so I was interested in sociology and anthropology when I was in my undergrad, so I did my criminology degree. I also had psychology as an undergrad major as well. And I felt like social work honestly just comprised of both of them. And that was really cool to me because I was like, I want to do my master's in both psychology and in criminology, but I know I can't really do that. I mean, I could, but that'd be quite, um, tenuous, I guess. That's not the word, but yeah. So, so I,
Okay.
yeah, so I was like, oh, it like, combines them both. And that was like really cool to me. But I also like social work because there's a macro level perspective. So it's not just individual based, or, like kind of looking at people as groups, but it's like the whole of society. And that's what I'm super interested in. Like, I think that's also how, you know, um, I guess the process of like stigma also can be, you know, um, talked about is it's not just, between individuals that it kind of plays out, but it's, more on a systemic level. And really seeing like, how that manifests and seeing how the systems affect individuals, but also how the individuals can change systems to make them, fit our needs better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. And again, I feel like most people might not think of social work that way. So thank you for putting it in that,
Yeah.
you know, that perspective. That's really interesting. Great. Um, and so, you mentioned stigma, and unfortunately, oftentimes there is a stigma surrounding behavioral health. And that could be the population that is served or even the field itself. So could you talk a little bit more about, either your experience with that or how you've seen that play out?
I feel like stigma is something that oftentimes we like talk about maybe in kind of general settings, or as something happening maybe outside of the room that we're in or something like that. I don't feel like I'm being stigmatized right now, and I hope that you don't either. It's just that like I think that we talk about when we talk about stigma, when we talk about these kind of greater social concepts, I feel like we kind of think about it as, oh, it's happening out there. but
Mhm.
we don't really recognize like, no, like it can happen in any situation, you know. And you know, I think it's kind of deep diving into um our own interactions with, you know, other people, but also how am I treating other people? You know, what, how am I talking about these things? How am I talking to people? You know,
Mhm.
am I looking at, you know, there's this term that, you know, someone had used. He's a pastor in the community, and he had said, you know, our neighbors down the street. And at first, I didn't really understand what he meant, but he means literally our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. You know, and
Mhm.
that to me was like really compassionate, because I feel like the way that we look at folks experiencing homelessness is kind of like, you know, like, oh, like we don't want to talk about them, or like, oh, we don't, you know, unless it's like directly in interactions with them or something like that. But just like something as simple as that, you know, like that has stuck in my head, because I'm like, they are my neighbors, you know, and they're always going to be my neighbors, because it's not about, you know, buildings per se. It's like understanding that, you know, and remembering really like this, there's a social work value of like, um, basically continuously giving, uh, every human being like this basic level of dignity and respect. And I feel like that's what that taught me, you know, that was like, yeah, that's very true. But there is such a stigma with people who don't have homes, you know.
Sure.
And so, but that's just one example. Like there's also stigma with you know, people from uh different ethnicities, different racial backgrounds. You know, we see, I think we see stigma a lot, actually. Um, and I only smile because it's not a good thing, but it's in that sense. But it's I think I smile because we have so many opportunities to learn to not do that. You know, um, and stigma kills, you know, it really does. And I think it's really important to be able to address it, um, really wherever it shows up. It does show up in behavioral health settings, I think, in general, even in like even in workplaces, you know,
Sure.
to be able to like discuss like, hey, yeah, I have depression, anxiety, you know, like I'll talk to my clients like that. I'll be like, hey, like I have depression, anxiety, like I understand what those kinds of feelings would feel like, you know. Um and you know, I work at a crisis unit right now, and I think it's really important for me to be able to connect with people, you know, even, you know, either on the crisis line or like people directly in front of me. Like I think it's really important for me to be able to say like, hey, here's a little bit about me, you know. And you kind of like might see me as like this professional in this field, which I am, but at the same time, like I'm human too. I also struggle with these things, you know. And I think that's very important to be able to humanize it. Um,
Yeah. And I think you put it perfectly when you started talking about that and just continue to reiterate. I think that it's important to talk to people and not at people. And
yes.
so, like you just said, building that connection to be able to say, this is what I've struggled with. So, this is how I can understand it instead of just, regurgitating textbook information
Hmm.
at them. So, yeah,
Yes.
that's a really great way to,
Yeah.
to put that.
Thank you.
Great. And you kind of did touch on, the barriers that you may face
Hmm.
whenever you try to reduce that stigma. So, is there any other way that you personally would plan to address stigma in your field?
Sorry, I also wrote down notes. So, um, um, I think first and foremost, doing my own inner work, I think is really important. To be able to like address my own internalizations of stigma. I feel like I have a lot of those, but also ways that you know, I have like externalized that stigma. So, you know, how I've treated other people, maybe that they're less than because, you know, they, I don't know, had a background going to prison, you know, like that's important for me to recognize, like, oh, hey, like that's a stigma. That's something that, you know, society has taught us probably to categorize us, but we don't have to be stuck in those, you know, labels. Um, and I think just continuing to educate myself, and really implementing like advocacy in my practice, you know, really, really trying my best to almost like get out of my own comfort zone of, you know, of not really speaking up maybe sometimes. Um, you know, and when I say internalization of the stigma, I think more so it's about, uh, just to clarify, it's not so much like me hating on other people per se, but it's more so like me hating on me. You know, and just kind of going like, you know, having this feeling of, even with my own education, like feeling like since I have experience with depression, anxiety, since I am a peer in some ways, you know, it's like just because of that does not mean that I don't belong in, you know, spaces of higher education
Mhm.
or, you know, specific professions or something like that. And I think that's something that I have thought, you know, in the past. And so it's kind of like uprooting those things so I can, you know, kind of plant more loving beliefs about myself, you know, things that, you know, maybe are coming more from my like spirit, you know, and less from what, I think kind of the systems in place were. Um, so I think, one way is to just kind of like talk about this stuff. You know, I think that's very important. I do have some coworkers at work that I love talking to about this stuff because they get it. You know, some of them are in social work, but some of them are not, and they still get it. You know, so it's not that you have to be in social work to understand, you know, the impacts, not just of stigma, but also of, you know, not, I guess, of embracing, you know, the challenges that we do have. It's human to have challenges, and in the systems that we live in, you know, it's even, I would say it's even more human because, you know, uh, we're expected in some ways to, or many ways to kind of mold ourselves to the systems, and then we kind of turn around and go like, oh, why is everything robotic? And it's because of
Right.
that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's why. Because because even though there's so much, push to, and so much pressure to mold, it's like we can't do that. You know, we just can't do
Yeah.
that to survive with our own like passions and our own, you know, our spirit. I don't think
Mhm.
that that's, you know, I don't think that's the way. I think that we've done that for a very long time and we just cannot. We can't continue to do that. Um, and I actually wanted to touch on a couple other things, but if that's okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. Yeah.
cool. I know that with some of the other barriers, in reducing stigma, I know that I didn't really talk too much about like the stigmas that I've faced. So I will touch on that in just a little bit. Um, but I think like, you know, it's some of the things is like, you know, just our ignorances. Like we have blind spots. Understanding that we have blind spots. It's okay that we have blind spots in the sense that we're human and we're not going to know everything, and that's okay. Um, but also, um, understanding how our like ignorance plays into, you know, our language, into our, actions towards other people, the actions that we don't take. You know, like what about, you know, if we have a favorite client or something, you know, what is the action that we take for them but we don't take for the next person? You know, like
Right.
that's
Mhm.
also important to address. And um inaccessibility to resources, we always talk about that, I think, in some ways, because, you know, in West Virginia it is really hard to, there's like hubs of resources, I think, you know, like in Charleston or in Morgantown, but there's not so much in every other place. So, you know, lack of transportation to resources, I think in many ways we can kind of see the inaccessibility as like when we have access to everything, like being in the in group, we don't, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for like everyone else who might be struggling, right?
Yeah.
Or like feeling like, oh, we have this resource we can't share because then we won't have enough. Like, no, that's not how funding works. Like the more demand there is, there's probably going to be more resources put towards those things. Um, but if we continuously kind of like shut that door and kind of go like, oh no, 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 like, there's not enough, then we actually are doing everyone a disservice. We don't even see how we're disservicing ourselves, which is kind of sad.
Right.
And I think also the stigmas that are perpetuated, our I think it's important to address like, oppression. Oppression does affect that. I think in many ways it kind of stems from oppression, is why we have so much stigma still around behavioral health. And not understanding that, it's kind of like not understanding it from a general lens that, behavioral health is very much physical and physical is very much behavioral. I think not understanding that connection is very, in some ways, like a Western concept. Because I think, again, with when I said like my Indian roots, like, I think it's pretty known in like Eastern kind of cultures that, it's important to be able to understand that everything's connected, like everything's interconnected. It's not just interconnected in my own body, but it is with everyone and everything beyond that, everyone beyond what I can see. So I think it's like understanding that, once we can like really connect those dots, I think that's when we're going to be making a lot more impact with the people who are also still like the people who are in the rooms with us right now, but also the people who are not in rooms with us just yet. I think it's connecting to everybody. I think that's very, very important. And I think, just being able to identify, the structures that exist that are putting us down, and then being able to identify and understand, what stigma am I experiencing, or what stigma am I putting onto other people? I think that's very important. And then understanding that, like, also, I think sometimes, like, in the past, I've heard, like, people go like, oh yeah, there's no stigma. There's no stigma with addiction. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's ridiculous that you think that there's no stigma in addiction. Like, people who genuinely were working in the field of addiction would be like, no, it doesn't exist. And I'm like, do we live in different realities? I think we live in different realities. You know what I mean? And I think I'm probably a little bit more connected than you are to this reality, because there's so much stigma. And that was a couple of years ago that was said, so like, and if there's still a lot right now, so I'm just kind of like baffled, kind of by the level of ignorance that we can have, even being in the field. That's too much that we need to address. I think if they were not my higher up, I would have addressed it, but I didn't know how to navigate that. You know what I mean? So like learning from that as well. And I think I guess with stigma too, I think a lot of it stems from like this fear of unknown, like not understanding truly, what are these mental health challenges? Why do they exist? What are the causes? Or not just mental health, but behavioral health in general. So like, why does addiction exist? That kind of stuff. And also fear of people. So people who maybe you're not used to or something, and then also like fear of unfamiliarity in general. I think that is also something that drives stigma. I think that's why a lot of people talk about how education is like one of the main ways. But I think when we think education, we think of external education, but I think also it's important to tap into here, and see like, hey, what am I doing that doesn't feel right? And Sorry, I've been talking a lot for.
No, this is great. Thank you.
um, yeah, so I think it's really just understanding, you know, the also understanding, I think that with every behavioral health challenge, there's also gifts that each person has, you
Mhm.
know, uh, and understanding that maybe even simply put is that like the reason I would argue that probably 80% of why we call it mental health challenges or you know disorders is because we still have so much stigma against people who have those things.
Mhm.
But I also would probably argue that most of the challenge is not so much. Well, okay, all right. Half the challenge is that we you know we're struggling with, you know, maybe like a depression voice is what I call it, but sometimes people say like addiction voice, that kind of thing. So like we have something pestering us inside going like, you know, you're not good enough or you're not worthy enough or you know, you're not deserving enough or whatever. Um and that's half the struggle, to just kind of deal with that, while also navigating the rest of life. You know, that's not even including other people's like stigma or their or the, you know, structures that be that are oppressive. But also um but also I think the other half of that struggle is that molding, the fact that we have to mold. Like, I'm not really supposed to be saying, you know, I have depression and anxiety. I'm not really supposed to be saying, you know, that I take medication for it. I'm not really supposed to be saying, you know, listing out my medications, you know, um, or even like really talking truly about like my struggles with it or like our real struggles with stigma, you know, but those are all the important things. That's what we need to be doing. You
Mhm.
know, I think that's precisely how we get out of the structures, is that we just genuinely talk about these conversations, you know, and these struggles that we have, but also the I think through that, I think through those brave conversations, honestly, we also see how strong people are. You know, the strength in their ability to navigate all the things, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Well,
I think I'm off my soapbox now.
well, so I'm super interested to learn because you do have such a great perspective. And so I'm curious to know, how do you plan to use this? So 5 years from now, you've graduated, you're in the field, serving the communities. What does 5 years from now look like to you?
So when I was kind of thinking about this before, I was like, you know, I think I think a while ago, I don't know, maybe like even a couple months ago, if I was asked that question, I would have been like, oh my gosh, like I have so much anxiety coming up in me because I don't know. I
Yeah.
honestly don't know. You know, but like now I think I feel more comfortable being able to say like, you know, there's not, you know, I'm not incomplete or inadequate to say, you know, I don't know. Um in the sense of like I know a general, you know, thing. Like I know that I am like very, you know, I know my interests and I know where it could lead me, but I don't know, you know, exactly really where I would be working or something.
Sure.
And I think in the past that would have been because I wouldn't really let myself dream.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I kind of like really, really struggled and still struggle with this kind of sense of inferiority. And I think that that has a lot to do with I just learned the term, so it's called colonial mentality, and it's like this internal. It's basically like internalizing the dangerous and very, very terrifying and horrifying effects of colonialism. So basically what that taught, you know, my ancestors and me, basically that we were not you know, kind of like that we're inferior, but also to a specific population. So in this case, it would have been British people, so basically white people, and but also like that. Uh, just kind of like putting other people's um, ideas, interests, and things like that over our own. So I think for a very long time, I did really struggle with just kind of dreaming. Like where would I be in 10 years? Where would I be in 5 years? Where would I be in a year? And so I think that's what I was struggling with before. But I think now it's just that I don't have a concrete answer because I feel like there's always opportunities that come up that are just like flabbergasting, and I'm just kind of like, oh, like, yeah, I'll take that, that's awesome, or whatever, things that I wouldn't have ever experienced, like thought that I would experience. So like even this interview, like I wouldn't have ever thought that I would experience this interview, but it's awesome and I really enjoy it, and so, but if you asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that I'd be in this, and being able to show up as myself. Like, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So I guess that's why I think I feel peaceful in knowing that I don't really know.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be something that ends up, being whatever it is, and it's going to be awesome. But also I think if you're more so asking like, what am I interested in, then I would say probably like really delving more into decolonizing work. So, kind of like, I guess like revolution of the systems is how I'm going to put that. And, decreasing oppression, decreasing the different ways that shows up. So that's not just racism, but it is also racism, but also sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, like all of the phobias and all of the isms,
Yeah.
and being able to really break through those structures so that we can live a much more fulfilling life. And also, continuing my inner work. I really enjoyed volunteering at the prisons, at the Hazleton prisons, up in Brewston Mills. So I think that could be an avenue. Prison social work is a potential, or prison something in the prison. And I would say also probably counseling and therapy. Like I can see myself working with individuals one-on-one, but I think it might be more helpful for me maybe in group settings. Hence probably also the interest towards prison social work, because that's usually in a group setting, I think.
Yeah.
And like I had said before, like enjoying, the macro level of things, societal level change, that kind of work. And really, I think understanding and connecting that, societal level of work still starts also with the individual, I think, and how it's all connected. So, and actually like a lot to do with stigma too, stigma and just kind of like the effects of how it really does screw with people's minds, when it's done to them, but also like living in the ignorance of not understanding how it affects other people. Like all of that stuff is really interesting to me in a way, but also I really want to like make sure that people aren't hurting like that. Like we don't need to hurt like that anymore. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm sorry.
No, whatever you are doing in 5 years, whatever you were doing in 5 months, whatever population you are serving or individual are going to be very lucky to have you. This was really great. I appreciate it so much. You've even, opened up avenues that I've never thought of. And I love that because that's exactly what we all need. That is what is going to break the stigma. So I really appreciate this. This has been wonderful. Good luck to you in your future endeavors. And thank you again for talking with me today.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you, Shubha.